This week I got to talk with Brittany Penner about her incredibly vulnerable and powerful memoir, Children Like Us. Here is the synopsis. By the time Brittany Penner is 7 years old, she has loved and lost 21 foster siblings who have come into her family and left, all of them Indigenous like her. When will it be my turn? She asks her mother time and time again. When will I be taken away? You won't be, she's told. You're adopted. You're here to stay. You're the lucky one. Brittany was relinquished into care on the day of her birth in 1989 and adopted by a white Mennonite family in a small prairie town. Her name and where she came from are hidden from her. All she is told is that she is part Métis. Her childhood is shaped by church, family, service, and silence. Her family is continuously shape-shifting as siblings enter and leave one by one. She knows to stay, she has to force herself into the mold created for her. She must be obedient, quiet, good, no matter what. Whenever she looks in the mirror, she searches her features, wondering if they've been passed down to her by her biological mother. She thinks if she can ever find her mother, she'll find the answers she's looking for. As Brittany moves into adolescence and then adulthood, she will uncover answers about her roots and her identity, but they will be more tangled than she could have imagined. This is a very powerful memoir. It's very vulnerable. She shares so many things about what it was like growing up in the situation she grew up in, and kind of examines in a very fair way the culture that allowed these types of adoptions and fostering situations to exist. So that being said, let's hear from Brittany. I am super excited. I'm with Brittany Penner today to talk about her memoir, Children Like Us. And I'm just so excited to dive into it. So thank you for coming on, Brittany.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited too.
Yeah. So there's a lot. There's just so much in this memoir. And what I was really noticing as I was reading it too, like a lot, in some ways it almost reads like fiction, like the way that it's written and the way there's still like symbolism throughout, which I guess is kind of like art imitating life. But I really enjoyed it. But the general concept for the listeners who may or may not have read it yet is that you were a native or part native child who was adopted into a Mennonite family who also fostered a lot of children, which kind of led to you having so many brothers and sisters that kind of came and then left. And then you obviously explore a lot of other stuff too. But can you kind of talk about what led you to wanting to write this story?
Mm-hmm. A few years ago now, I had thought about how it would be interesting to write a novel actually about um, two lineages
Mm.
of settler women. So like just European settlers in Canada and Indigenous line, and how these two lines of women specifically um, cross paths through adoption,
Mm.
and just the loaded history that comes with that, especially in the United States for sure, but especially in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and pretty early on into thinking about what that would look like as a novel, I realized that that's just my story. That's my life. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think novels are the right medium to tell certain stories, and I think memoir is other times the right medium, and that was certainly the case here.
Yeah. Yeah. That is fascinating then, because it felt so as it, not that memoirs aren't engaging, but it felt engaging in a similar way to novels. So that's kind of, that makes sense to me, at least, that was like in your head at first.
I I don't think I've had that feedback that I can think of, and so that means a lot to me actually to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's also why before we were on air, I was like, I don't know if these things are spoilers or not. I think that might have been part of why it's in my head, because there are just so many like big, powerful moments throughout the whole story. What it really, there were a lot of things about it that like resonated or spoke to me as well, but you really, you kind of like don't 100% like take a this is how things should have happened, not like a clear cut like explanation, because it is really complex.
Mm.
So it's you basically the 60s scoop that you talk about that was happening, where a lot of Indigenous children were kind of taken from their families, not always like taken, sometimes it was adoptions
Mhm.
specifically. um, and basically a lot of them were living with families who were not connected to what their culture was as well. And so I feel like you strike a pretty good balance, especially at the beginning, of like it can seem like such a good thing, and that's why you were told like you should be grateful, you should feel lucky that people are adopting and fostering, but it can also be really conflicting for the children, or confusing for the children who are going through it. So can you talk about like what it was like writing about such a murky gray area?
Yeah, I think personally I probably have stronger opinions than would necessarily be conveyed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was intentional because their readers are coming at it at the to the book from so many different walks of life, and I wanted to leave enough
Mm-hmm.
space for people to kind of form their own
Mm.
thoughts and opinions on it without me directly saying this is how it should be or shouldn't be, or and certainly I don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
um, but it I tried to kind of take a step back and detach from the story a bit, and write it
Mm.
from that detached place, and like a healthy detachment, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
um, and I think the one thing that, because it is a complicated story, a complicated life with a lot of nuance, one thing that was a saving piece of it for me was, in the book I talk a lot, or I write a lot about my relationship with my cousin George,
Mm-hmm.
and he is still in my life now. He wasn't for a portion of my life, but we reconnected in recent years, and having him by my side to reach out to at different moments during the book,
Mm.
writing up the book, was really helpful because he understands in a way that not many other people in my life understand the murkiness,
Right.
and how you can love members of your family and still, members of your adopted family, and still kind of hate the policies
Mm-hmm.
that put you together,
Yep.
because the policies were rooted in racism and were rooted in colonization and colonial beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, the murkiness, I think I had a bit of a reprieve from it at times because of my relationship with him.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It
Hmm.
kind of what you're talking about with the policies that are in place that uh made this possible, and definitely was in some ways about erasure, or that was kind of like the goal, like erasing that Indigenous culture in general, even if this was kind of like how they approached it. um where did my question go? I totally had it. Oh, and so you also talk about how, especially within like church cultures, or in this one specifically with Mennonites, they kind of feel like they're like doing God's work by adopting kids or fostering them. Um, and can you kind of talk about how like with young children especially, like you're very impressionable, and how it can kind of be used as indoctrination into that version of religion?
Yeah, without question. I think a lot about the residential school system, and the
Mm-hmm.
60s Scoop had started as the residential school system had begun devolving, even though it persisted, at least in Canada, until the 90s. In the 50s and 60s was when it really started deflating,
Mm-hmm.
and the 60s Scoop, that's when that started. And there was, without question, the residential school system was about essentially erasing the everything about us
Mm-hmm.
and turning us into the government's idea of what killing the Indian but saving the child. That's what
Correct. Yeah.
the phrase was. And the 60s Scoop, I think about how many of us were adopted into very religious families and how that was just a similar kind of, it was just repackaged and it was a recycled action.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I remember hearing often the passage from the Bible where Jesus had said, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. Um, and there was never any question in my mind or in many of my cousins' minds that the least of these were us. We were the
Right.
least of these. We were the bottom of the barrel in terms of the kids that were wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
so if for anyone to take us in, we were lucky because I mean, the thought was and the belief was, well, if we didn't take you in, you would be homeless, you would be unclaimed.
Right.
And when that's paired with religion and paired with, well, this is what we believe is what God believes or what God has told us,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very damaging belief that sort of gets imprinted upon. I don't know if it gets imprinted upon your DNA, but it certainly gets imprinted upon your bones
Right.
that we are the least of these and that we are lucky to be wanted in any fashion. And so if that is also paired with abuse and or harmful beliefs and or sexual violence and or you name it, well, we should be thankful for the bare minimum. So if it comes with these other things, then that can only reflect something bad about us.
Yeah. Yeah. It there I just read recently a book called Original Sin by Eve L. Ewing, who talks about in America how we basically used manifest destiny as a way to do really, really similar stuff. And like we were like, well, God wanted us to have this land,
Yeah.
and we are saving these savages, is the terminology that was used, not that I would necessarily use. And so much was justified because it was like, well, God wants me to do this and I'm allowed to do this. And a lot of what you were, even when I was reading your memoir and what you just said as well, was reminding me a lot of that concept here as well, where the idea of original sin is just like, you come into this world and you're already evil, you're already terrible, you need to like work for love, for care, for like all of that. And I grew up very much in a version of Christianity that was like that was like so obsessed with like, you come into this world evil and you need to like work your way towards being worthy. And it's so damaging. And when you're so young, and I mean it happens for people in adulthood too, but when you're so young, there's just so much fear when that's what you're coming from all the time, and so it is hard to ever stand up for yourself.
Yeah, without question. And it's so interesting because that the brand of Christianity that I was adopted into is very much that way. Like Mennonites are nothing if not hardworking, and there's a beauty in that.
Yeah.
Um, but when it is steeped in the relationship with God within the context of religion, um, it was like everybody was born bad.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you were Indigenous, then you were one level below that even,
Yes.
um, because there was a certain part of you that couldn't be washed out.
Right. Yeah. I remember one of the parts where you even like say that someone within the church said to you like, uh something like, we would adopt native babies, but we know they're always trouble, but like if we knew they were like you, like we would. And then
Yeah.
it's like, I can only imagine that then you feel like you're like having to be the good example for like all Indigenous girls or children, and that's so unfair too. And it's like, what, like why would you even say that to a child?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember it very clearly. And I remember exactly who it was that said that too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that just imprints.
it was in church as well, and so it was literally within God's house that this was said. And how do you
Yes.
separate comments like that from your understanding of who your this creator is?
Yeah, totally.
It's a lifelong thing I'll be unpacking, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it ever completely leaves, that's for
Yeah.
sure. Kind of along those lines, one of the things that really resonated from me earlier in the book, there's a part where you talk about, I think you're with George, but it might have been Fred and Shani, but I can't totally remember. But you were like outside and having fun and like really enjoying it. And you have a line that basically is like, I think this is where I feel God. And
Mhm.
then you essentially feel sinful or bad for feeling that way because you're not in church. And then when you're in church, you feel bad because you don't feel God there, and you just internalize that something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
um I've like had a lot of deconstructing in the last like decade of my life, and that's like what's really meaningful to me, is that I think the feeling that some people call church, I find almost everywhere except church. Now there are exceptions, but I resonate with that so much. Like connecting with people feels like church. Like sometimes going to the movie theater feels like church. Um, so can you kind of talk about that, like what that feeling was like to have that be so contradictory?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Because I think in the book it's when George and I are catching fireflies,
I think
maybe.
so, because yes, because I was like, oh, and this is on the cover.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and just being on the land, essentially. I know, for some people, when they have sort of reclaimed part of their culture, but not wanting to abandon their upbringing, being on the land feels almost like a really peaceful and natural way of blending the two.
Mm,
And for me, I just remember feeling way more connected with whatever that was inside of me that was connected to everyone else, that was connected to something that was unseen, a spiritual world. Being outside and being with animals was another big piece for me.
mm-hmm.
And there was so much that felt like prayer that wasn't bowing my head and closing my eyes and being quiet. Um,
Yeah.
but I was never told. Well, I was told directly that that wasn't the way that where you find God. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's where you are with yourself, and yourself is bad.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas at church, it was very, very regimented and very, wooden pews. And I mean, because it was a good Mennonite church, there were no cushions either,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't need them. You don't need comfort in church.
Yes.
And I never felt a sort of centeredness or a connection with much when I was at church, but that's where I was told I should.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, especially on the backdrop of these messages that there was something wrong with you to begin with, because otherwise you wouldn't have needed to be adopted, and otherwise you wouldn't have needed
Mm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
You would have been born in this way. On the backdrop of that, then being in a church and not feeling like you are feeling what others are supposed are apparently feeling,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you're not feeling what you're supposed to be feeling, well, then that's just another reinforcement that something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And how can you be lovable, and how can you be a good child in the eyes of the Lord when there's so much evidence that
Mm.
there's something wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. That part where you were talking about how like the church pews were uncomfortable and it was because life's not comfortable and like get used to it. I was just like, oh my goodness. um, but I think all of it kind of ties into, you definitely dive into like dissociation and detachment, which kind of then comes from the hypervigilance that you experienced all the time. So I feel like, at least in my interpretation of it, it was both the fact that these brothers and sisters you're like getting close to them, and you also don't know when they might just disappear. And then you also just felt all the time like someone's about to come take me. And why would you think any different as a child who was like only seeing that? Um, so can you kind of talk about just like un- well, actually my other question too is like, as I was reading it, what I thought was really powerful is it feels like you do tap into your child self. Like it feels like a child who genuinely doesn't know that this could be any different. And so was that purposeful with the writing to want to kind of like feel that way, or like as you were writing it, was that just kind of like you just remembered your experience?
It was both, I think. And my editor was really on top of that as well, because sometimes
Mm.
she would like something and be like, this feels like too much of a sophisticated thought for
Okay, yeah.
6 year old or what have you. Um, and that was a big part of why I wanted to write in the present tense as well,
Yeah.
was for that sense of urgency and the sense of, because so much of what I've experienced can be so disorienting,
Mhm.
especially without someone um, standing there as sort of a guide or a a secure tree that you can return to. I didn't really
Mhm.
have that. And so I'm left as a child trying to figure out all of these complicated, confusing things.
Mhm.
And I wanted readers to feel the weight of that
Mhm.
and to feel the confusion and to feel the disorienting nature of that.
Mhm.
And so it was definitely intentional. Not that it always landed, but I tried.
Oh no, I think it did because there were that's what's hard sometimes when I even when I think back on like stuff from my childhood where I'll be like, man, how did I not? Sometimes I still do it to myself where I'm like, how did I not know that that was weird? And I'm like, because you were a kid.
Yeah, and you judge your like normal is defined by your immediate world, not
Yes.
you don't have the perspective of
Right.
everything.
Yeah. The other thing that really stood out is like, yes, generally your physical needs were getting met, generally, but there was also a lot of neglect, both emotionally. Like, there are a few times when you kind of mention, like, why would I share this feeling? Like, they're not going to care. There are a couple moments where, like, you do need medical help or medical attention or a doctor, and you just kind of know like that's almost a luxury in our family. I'm not going to ask for help. Like I will deal with this. And then obviously later in life or even in those moments, it's so easy to abandon yourself because basically everyone else is neglecting your needs as well. So can you kind of talk about the the journey towards realizing like, oh, my physical and emotional needs do matter?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that I'm still working on it.
Yes.
um, but I think I learned the message early on, like, and I mean before I school age even,
Mm.
that my needs were a burden, and that
Mhm.
my needs spelled trouble for everyone else.
Yeah.
Um, except for I write a lot about my maternal grandmother,
Mm.
and she um she was kind of my guiding star, and I don't know if I perceived my needs as being a burden to her
Mhm.
when I was with her. But she was also of a different era where emotional needs were not something that they really tapped into.
Right.
So anyway, I learned the message early on that my needs were could only be a burden.
Mhm.
And that's still something that now I am only now in my mid to late 30s learning that my needs, that I'm not living the healthiest life when I continue to suppress my needs and when I continue to believe that they don't matter.
Yeah.
And it does not contribute to healthy relationships if that's the template I'm working off of.
Yeah.
And so it is a continued struggle that's maybe a little bit easier than it used to be
Mm-hmm.
to learn to communicate my needs, and to even so it's not uncommon where I'll say something to my husband where I'll say, I don't, this feels like it doesn't matter, but I think I should probably mention XYZ.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as something like, I haven't been getting sleep the last several nights, and I should probably get a good sleep tonight. Or, that's a very simple example.
Right. It's hard when you've been told to like not listen to your body and not trust your body and not complain. Even sleep is hard to be like, oh, I need this.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, you're kind of in this constant state of sometimes intentionally, sometimes completely unintentionally, and
Mhm.
being unaware of how much you're gaslighting yourself and your body, and
Yes. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you learn from others.
Right. It's what you were around. That was one of the things that was fascinating to me all the way through it, since we're also kind of talking about self-abandonment, is like you're adopted, and there's a line at some point where you're like, even my father forgot me before I was born, which is just
Yeah.
like so heartbreaking, but it's the case for a lot of people. And then your parents are kind of having kids in and out of the house, so there's like abandonment there. George is taken away at one point. More abandonment, even if it's not just about you. And without giving spoilers, there's even a moment where you and your mom are essentially in danger, and it feels like she just runs away and doesn't want to help you in that situation. And then when
Hmm.
you do bring it up, she's like, you remembered it wrong. And I was just like, oh, like you don't know how to out you don't know how to know you're being gaslit again when you're a kid. Like you just don't know any better. And then yes, it becomes so easy to do it to yourself as well.
Yeah, the way people treat you and the way that they talk to you becomes oftentimes the way that you treat yourself and the way you talk to yourself. So it becomes external dialogue becomes internal dialogue.
Mhm.
And especially when you're young, you don't have, everything is so external in terms of how you understand the world, that to question that internal dialogue you eventually adopt, it doesn't come until much later.
Mhm.
And by then everything's so firmly ingrained that it takes a lot to try and unlearn it.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, anything you learn in your childhood, especially for extended periods of time, it's so hard to get. It's never completely out of your, like, kind of like you're saying, like whether it's your DNA, your bones, your brain, your heart, whatever it is. When I started therapy myself, I was like, okay, so like how long will this take? How will I know when I'm done? How will I know when I've conquered it all?
I need
And
to
she
write this
was
down. I need to.
yeah, she was like, that's not how it works, but like you'll learn tools and you'll learn how to like catch when you're doing this to yourself. And I think you just said it, or you said it previously, like it gets easier to like catch the stuff when it's happening sometimes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not like in emotional turmoil every now and then, and like still a little bit like, what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. If you're anything like me going into therapy, you're kind of like, I know that's not how it works, but let's just say it does.
Like,
Let's
what if
just say
it
that is how it
could?
works. And I'm going to give it 4 weeks, and we're just going to like hear
Yes.
the things of how it's going to work. No, that's
Yeah,
not how it's going to work. Well, can we just pretend that's how it's going to
I know. It'd be so nice if it could feel that way. Um, the other thing that I thought was really cool, there's a sentence at some point that says like, I am in constant search of story, of a narrative that feels whole and truthful and that helps me understand my family and my place in it. And that stood out to me for a couple different reasons. I feel like stories are what helped me understand the world so much more, especially like the version of like evangelical Christianity I grew up in. We only bought from like the Christian bookstore, Christian radio stations, so like I didn't have access to other stories. And so then stories, both fictional and nonfiction, have meant so much for me in terms of understanding myself and understanding other people. So can you kind of talk about how you kind of even know that you were feeling that way as a kid, and
Mhm.
then what it was like to get to like write your story?
Yeah, it felt like that's one thing. There were many things that felt like they were kind of stomped out of me as a child because
Mm-hmm.
of life experiences and family dynamics and things like that. And the need for storytelling and the desire to tell stories myself, that was one thing that felt like it persisted despite everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so even even when I was kind of in the throes of med school and life was insanely busy, everything just made more sense when it was contextualized in story.
Mm.
And I think being able to piece together my own story, it's something that started a lot earlier than the writing of the actual book.
Mm.
I think I look at the last maybe 10 years ish of really deconstructing my childhood and understanding different experiences and how they impacted me, and then piecing them together, weaving them together almost like a patchwork
Mm.
quilt.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like the storytelling piece to me, or at least the story making, the
Mm-hmm.
meaning of it all.
Yeah.
And then it's the in the last couple of years, the weaving it together with different colored threads
Mm-hmm.
and in different patterns and things like that. I suppose that's the story making of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I I wrote the book the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 100,000 words or whatever it was, 90, 100, and it just was not the book. It was a telling of the story,
Mm.
and it was, I've heard so many people say, and by so many people I mean so many writers say, if I wrote this book 10 years ago, it would be a different book. If I wrote it 10 years from now, it would be a different book.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote two different books. The first one felt a lot more like a retelling and kind of it was a recapturing of it,
Yeah.
but the actual weaving of symbolism
Mm-hmm.
and certain metaphors and the actual art of the
Mm-hmm.
storytelling came with the second time that I rewrote it, and I used almost nothing from the first draft,
Oh
which
wow.
which was a little disheartening, but
Yeah.
that's what. And that itself felt, it almost felt like you have a in Mennonite culture at least,
Mm-hmm.
you have, once certain clothes or blankets or towels or what have you are no longer good for use, then they're cut into patches and they're made into a quilt.
Mm-hmm.
And so it felt like I had a bunch of different patterns and patches.
Mm-hmm.
And the second time I wrote it, it was like quilting everything into this really beautiful, or
Mm-hmm.
what felt like beautiful to me, um, tapestry.
Mm.
And there was this inherent fun and joy in doing that.
That's good.
Yeah, and it felt very grounding.
Yeah.
Way to put it too.
Mm-hmm. Especially in relation to gaslighting, just retelling it the way that you remember it and feel it is probably so empowering, but also like heartbreaking at times, I'm sure. Um, but the other thing that I thought was cool about the structure is you kind of have, it's not necessarily interstitials because it's not like their own chapters, but you have like descriptions of photos or descriptions of home video. Um, and one, I was kind of wondering like how you decided to include that. And two, was there any part of it? Because in some of the video ones, you'll even mention like I would not remember that this had happened if I hadn't seen it. So, two, was there like a what was the experience like rewatching stuff after like being gaslit as a child?
Yeah. So I think my decision to include those, it felt very just reflective of my entire process the last number of years, because I found that in order to process and piece together my understanding of my childhood and to understand a different narrative than what I was told or fed,
Mm-hmm.
I went through those photos and I went through those videos not infrequently. The videos, that was more of a new thing in
Mm.
the when it came to the book, because I hadn't had a VHS or a
Oh
VCR,
yeah.
and so I had to try and track one down. Um, but the book just felt like a reflection of that,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was something I tried, and it felt like throwing spaghetti at the wall that did end up sticking. And there were other parts of I tried to weave in some diary or journal entries
Mm-hmm.
from when I was a child, and that didn't land.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Just in that it didn't really work with the book.
Yeah.
Uh, and so the photos and the videos and weaving them in thankfully did work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, they both just felt like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick.
Mm-hmm.
And watching the videos and seeing certain things, it felt very validating in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
because I could see uh, literal external manifestations of what was happening internally for me, or when certain life events happened, seeing it on the screen or more in video than in photos, just in terms of my mannerisms and seeing the
Mm-hmm.
change in my demeanor over the years.
Yeah.
That felt actually very validating. And I think so much when I look back at my childhood felt very questioning, like, am I remembering it correctly?
Right.
Did I really experience this? Maybe I'm making this up. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
this didn't even happen. And so having the video evidence that some of these things did happen, or having, well, yeah, something did happen because my demeanor really changed and I really am presenting as a lot more closed off. And I
Mm-hmm.
know, looking back, that in the year leading up to this, certain videos, certain things happened,
Mm-hmm.
certain traumatic things. And so there were parts that felt just very validating and even more grounding in being able to write about it, and being able to write about it as, yes, this is part of my story.
Yeah.
And I think many people don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, get that, the literal video evidence of being like, yeah, look,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm so thankful. My baba, my maternal grandmother, was the one who
Mm-hmm.
recorded so much of it. And I'm so thankful to her now
Yeah.
for that, because it has provided a sort of healing for me as well, in this sort of providing a bit of almost like a ticket that, yes, you can trust yourself in this, because
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Totally.
you see it.
It's when what you're saying, like a lot of people don't understand, and I'm glad a lot of people don't understand, but when you've been gaslit for so long and then do want to stand up for yourself, sometimes you're still someone who's like, at least in my experience, I've talked about how sometimes being empathetic or like open to questioning things or thinking about things, sometimes you will then turn it back on yourself and you're like, am I really blowing it out of proportion? Like, they really were good people, right? Like,
Yeah.
everyone else is telling me that, like, I'm like, we never would have thought that about your parents or whatever. And it is so hard when like your entire experience, just for, I mean, for probably like 2 decades, essentially, that almost 2 decades that you live at home typically, uh it just, even when you feel like, no, I deserve better, there's still those thoughts that are like, am I exaggerating it? So I know there were even some times when you would talk about the videos where you would be like, I didn't even like completely think this. And so I do, I'm grateful to Baba for taking all of this video that you could still get to rewatch and learn from. The other thing that one of the video clips, I think it was a video clip where your dad like draws a hopscotch.
Yeah.
I don't know, is that a pattern? A hopscotch pattern?
Yeah.
And then is that Fred then? I'm like mixing up who's who. But Fred can't totally get it. And your dad has like a really tender moment where he actually helps him, and you even say that it almost like makes you emotional. It made me emotional to read it too, to see like that part of your dad. And then later on you talk about how you could see how he felt insecure in his own intelligence. And so for me, like those two kind of the video and then also you realizing that about him were kind of like connected, but it was also making me think about like intent versus impact, which is something, at least in America, I've seen that more when we're talking about like racism as well. We're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. And you're like, okay, but the impact still was really big. So what kind of where I'm going with that was it difficult to, because I feel like in some ways you very much show that the intent of your parents, that there was some goodness to it, or at least maybe they thought it was. But
Yeah.
the impact is still really heavy for you. So how was writing that?
Yeah, when it comes to my parents and writing, that's still such a tricky thing to even talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Just in that that was, I think, where I poured most of my energy in terms of wanting to not, insofar as I can, control it,
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to hurt them in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because that's something that in memoir, as I'm writing, I want anyone who's in my story, anyone who's in my writing, in order for me to share about these experiences and feel secure at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
for me at least, I've had to question, what does it mean to share my experience, but also love and honor those who are part of the story as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many experiences that I did not include in the book,
Mm-hmm.
specifically when it comes to my family and members of my family. And it was that line of, would this harm the relationship more than help the narrative of the story?
Mm-hmm.
If I felt it would harm, then I opted to keep it out. Um, but there were moments where, especially with my dad, writing about him, I could find a lot more of a tender sort of disposition towards him,
Mm-hmm.
because I think his intent, there was sort of this earnestness in his intent, and what he believed was right. And I can really, I think that's in the writing of this is when I really started seeing that more.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a lot easier sometimes to just paint it with a certain colored brush and just say it's all this one way
Mm-hmm.
and not allow for that, because that sometimes does feel more validating.
Yes. Especially when
And
you've had no power for so
yeah,
long.
and it feels cleaner
Yeah.
and easier, but it doesn't feel truer, it doesn't feel more honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried, I tried to hold both of those. And there was also something beautiful, I think, in allowing for the intent, for the pieces of his heart, for instance, to shine through in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because as humans, so many of us are not all good and we're not all bad.
Right.
And allowing for those brush strokes, I think, is, for me, was at least really important,
Mm-hmm.
and reflective of life too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's what makes it harder sometimes to sort out stuff in adulthood, because in general and with like most people, I want to leave room for like gray areas and understanding that none of us are perfect. But then there are situations that are really damaging to be in, and like sometimes you do have to remove yourself from that situation. And so then it's so hard to tell which way to go sometimes. Um but there are extremes that are not healthy to be around at the same time.
Yeah.
Um the kind of along those lines, where like some of the impact was like you didn't necessarily feel attached to any identity, almost, is some of it. And I thought one of the most brilliant vignettes in here, which I know is also your life, but when you talk about dressing up like an Indian for Halloween, and the sentence that says like, I just looked like a native kid dressing up like a white kid who's dressing up like a native kid for Halloween. Like, just, I felt like it described so much of everything that you were talking about from your childhood. So can you kind of talk about that really conflicting part of your identity?
Yeah. So the scene you're talking about, my mom had, I think it was like a potato sack,
Mm-hmm.
like a harness dress, and she took a chicken feather from the barn and put it in my hair. And I have the photo of it, and it still makes me physically uncomfortable looking at the
I
photo.
bet.
Um, and and it's difficult. And my mom, as much as I truly do love her, I don't know if that's something that she'll ever fully be able, or even slightly be able to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is the position I was in,
Mm-hmm.
and how that, just that one photo felt. I'm thankful you picked up on that, because that's how it certainly felt for me, was that this was just sort of emblematic of my entire childhood.
Yeah.
And what I heard from, I think the moment I can remember hearing things from my mom was like, you don't even look that native. You
Ugh.
don't even look that native. You look this, you look that. You're not really native. You're not really this. And that was always something that was really positive in her mind.
Right.
And yet she would showcase some aspects that were clearly linked to my indigeneity, which was my skin color, for instance, and how brown it would get in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Or she didn't cut my hair until I was about 8 or 9, and my hair extended way past my butt.
Mm-hmm.
You could see it between my legs if I opened them. And so it was very confusing for me to have these pieces of even my physical presence that were very linked to being Indigenous,
Mm-hmm.
but then to have that verbally erased and
Mm-hmm.
physically in some ways. And it still sticks with me to this day, because I look at photos and it's just an inherent, like, or not inherent, it's just a baked in response at this point for me to look at my phone and to look at a selfie or to look at a photo and to ask myself, well, do I look Indigenous here?
Ugh.
Do I do I look do I look this or do I look that? Like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
don't really look. And so I think I'm constantly looking for that mirroring of, am I Indigenous enough in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Am I enough in this scenario? And
Mm-hmm.
it's exhausting. And I pray for the day that maybe that one day won't be the case.
Yeah.
And now at least I have the awareness of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something. But it's a very, very complicated piece of who I am, and it's a very complicated part of my childhood,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is something that it feels like it's still a burden to carry,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little less heavy than it was.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the awareness helps sometimes. A big part of my therapy too, my therapist would often tell me like, you can know something, and for people who aren't watching, she would like point at her head, but then there's like knowing and understanding something, and she would like point at her heart essentially. And
Mm.
I liked to, I still do, intellectualize what happened to me and what I was processing. And it's like fun to stay up in your head. But it kind of what we were talking about, it takes so much time for it to like actually sink into like your soul and your like personality to like not have all those things still coming up into your mind. Like it takes so long. Especially like just that your mom was saying it from so early on, like even just like talking about she just called you really tan, right? Is that what it
Yeah.
was? Yeah.
And I actually didn't clue into that until it came out in the writing where my editor was like, Britt, do you mean like here you call yourself tanned?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Like, isn't this
Oh,
your skin color? And I was like, wait.
you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it that didn't clue in until the writing of itself.
It's so yeah, it's fascinating the stuff you don't realize is going on internally until you do externalize it. And then sometimes it also still takes someone else like observing it to be able to catch it for you.
Yeah.
The another thing that I kind of noticed, there's a part where you're talking about how, well, I think it's when you were having like really really bad headaches even, and it was the thing again where it didn't really feel like anyone really cared that was happening to you. But you had also heard this message over and over again of like how there are other people in much worse pain than you. But then also, then how do you ever know when your pain is enough, when it matters, when you should do something about it? So can you kind of talk about just like learning to like trust that you can have pain and others can still be worse, but yours
Yeah.
could still matter?
Yeah, that's also still tricky, because then
Mm-hmm.
I went into a profession where
Right.
um, doctors are notoriously bad patients. Um, and so I still have such a difficult time knowing if what I am experiencing is something or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so being pregnant was very interesting for me in that way this last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a baby 8 weeks ago now. And
Oh
so,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
Congratulations and wow. Just doing interviews 2 months later.
I think I was doing an interview maybe a week later after.
Oh my gosh. Of course you were though.
Yeah, yeah. um, but yeah, that probably also reflects this whole thing
Mm-hmm.
um, of just being able to push yourself and
Mm-hmm.
deny your own pain and not know if is this anything? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm trying to think of a time where I think it's slowly come. It's been a slow burn over the last 10-15 years of of kind of learning I'm allowed this pain and
Mm-hmm.
my pain doesn't disqualify yours, but yours doesn't disqualify mine.
Right.
And I am allowed to also feel this pain
Mm-hmm.
on an emotional and physical level.
Mm-hmm.
And I am allowed for it to I'm allowed for it to impact what I do. I'm allowed
Mm-hmm.
to slow down if I need to. I'm allowed to rest if I need to, if that's what my body is saying. Um, and and sometimes it's just like I was still doing burpees and sprints the day I went into labor,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
and which is just to say that sometimes I'm really not good at practicing this part,
Yeah.
um, because I can push my body in ways that aren't necessarily always healthy. Although I'm not saying that wasn't healthy.
Right. I know what you mean.
That was just a reflection of being able to do that if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it is a really interesting experience of learning to allow pain um, in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was reminding me, well, you even kind of talk in multiple different situations about how you really didn't see either of your parents cry for a very long time.
My
And I
father,
remember,
my mother cried.
oh sorry, it was your dad then.
I was gonna say my mom.
because she
she was
was allowed to be
the
hysterical
yes, yes, yes.
and no one else was. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like the other really, that's a whole difficult dynamic in the family when like one person's feelings, they matter and no one else's does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I remember like learning that like crying from a social standpoint is a good thing because it actually alerts, like it actually is telling people like I need help, or like I'm getting overwhelmed by my feelings. So even from a social standpoint, that's where it's useful. Then there's the whole like literal chemical, like you're losing cortisol in your tears. So there's so many good reasons for crying, but I was like, it was very much a like suck it up, like get over it family as well. And I swear I was going somewhere with this, but I'm starting to lose it again. uh oh, and then in relation to pain, it's like it's how people can know you're in emotional pain or you're in physical pain. And when you're just like, I don't want anyone to feel bothered by me, or I already know that nobody's going to care about it, you're like, don't go there with those feelings. Don't share your pain.
Yeah, yeah. Because sharing, I think, for some of us, it puts you in this really vulnerable spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn to not share it
Mm-hmm.
because then you're more open to getting hurt. You're more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think what can really change things is being surrounded by people or even just one person
Yeah,
or an animal, I don't know, um,
totally.
where, yeah, you're still in a vulnerable spot when you admit this or when you kind of acknowledge what you're experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
but the person or the animal on the other side of things will not hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something really healing in that relational aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're not gonna like use it against you as like some kind of power play, essentially. The other thing, so the title is also includes in walking herself home.
Mm,
So you do have moments where you kind of learn how like you can feel safe within yourself, not just through dissociation, which dissociation and detachment sometimes do feel so nice and relieving, but that you can kind of, you can care about yourself even though it didn't feel like other people did as well. And then you've kind of mentioned with your job now, you help people. Can you talk about what that process was like and how it kind of, if that's like rewiring any of the stuff from your childhood?
I think something that, because I'm a fairly empathic person, or I like to think so at least,
Mm-hmm.
the being in medicine has always felt like a bit of a natural fit, especially for someone who's high achieving and told that, like,
Right.
the harder you work, the more you are worth.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, a really common message that a lot of us learned.
Yeah.
Um, there was always a part of me that would sort of have this stance with people in front of me where it's like, right, you're allowed to feel this pain. I'll be here with you, but like
Mm-hmm.
I would not allow this for myself.
Yeah.
You know? And there were probably times too where there would be judgment on like, really?
Mm-hmm.
Really? You're gonna cry here? Um, and maybe I'm being a bit too hard on myself in saying that, but something really shifted when I started allowing myself to acknowledge my experiences and the way that they impacted me and allowing for that.
Mm-hmm.
Just the tides of those pains.
Mm-hmm.
Something shifted in terms of, I think maybe it boils down to self-compassion, and the more compassion you have for or the more compassion I've had for myself and the younger versions of myself, I feel that I have more space within me maybe to show and feel that compassion for others in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
and really kind of have that, the ways that it softens my speech to myself and the way I treat
Mm-hmm.
myself extends to the way I treat others. And so I can really be there for people, my patients, in my office or in the hospital, in ways that I hope helps them feel that they can be there for themselves in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing there's a quote that says like be who you needed when you were younger, and
Mm.
it always is like so powerful to me that you can kind of have this chance in your adulthood for meaning making, is kind of like how I say it. So you can kind of, you can make your experiences meaningful even if they weren't ones that you would technically say you're happy happened to you, or you wouldn't want them to happen to anyone else. But for me, that has been really powerful, is like the moments where what happened feels like something useful in my ability to connect with someone else about something. And I think it does help me be nicer to myself, because I'm actually nicer to most people than I am to myself. So it
Yeah.
kind of comes back and is like, okay, I wouldn't say this to this person. Like, why am I saying it to myself?
Yeah, it's sort of this reverse of, when you're a child and learning to talk to yourself the way that others talk to you.
Yeah.
It's sort of this reverse of like learning to talk to yourself in the way that you're talking to others in
Yeah.
this really positive
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah. So you are thinking about doing some like storytelling courses. Was there something that inspired that?
I mean, I would love to, because I think so much of my healing
Mm-hmm.
has come, interestingly, not from the medical side
Mm-hmm.
of things, not from Western medicine. It has
Yeah.
come from, you know, and like I practice Western medicine, so of course it's something that I value,
Mm-hmm.
um,
It's just not the whole picture.
not whatsoever. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think so much of my healing has come through storytelling, but then
Mm-hmm.
also through learning my story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dream at some point of crafting storytelling courses to help people um, find healing with various traumas and complex
Mm-hmm.
trauma, because we know that there just isn't good medicine. Like there's the treatment for trauma and PTSD and that realm of things is never found in a medication. Medication can help,
Yeah.
but it's about, the nervous system and processing, and it's relationships.
Neuroplasticity. Yeah.
Yeah, relationships, and it's through story, at least in my case.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do dream of crafting storytelling courses, and i
Mm-hmm.
i dream of weaving that into medicine itself and
Yeah.
teaching. It's just a matter of practicing and writing my book, and now being a new mom, of
Yeah.
trying to figure out where to fit that in,
Mm-hmm.
and how that will look.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a pipe dream maybe at this point, but
Probably not. I bet you're gonna find a way to do it, given what we've talked about.
yeah.
Um, Well, I found it very powerful. I find story really, really powerful. So I think that's also a lot of what I connected to in your story. But I also do at the end always ask if you have any books you've read recently that you enjoy or any that you like would always recommend.
I adore um, Lost and Found by Catherine Schultz.
Okay.
That's like one of my favorite all-time books. Um, her writing itself, I think she's one of my favorite writers. Um, I just finished Flashlight by Susan Choi.
Mm-hmm.
I already finished that a few months ago, and she's brilliant, and so I love her writing.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of anyone else's. In terms of like Indigenous stories, there's
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous storytelling. Tanya Talaga is a Canadian journalist, and her book The Knowing is one that I recommend for everyone, just because it dives into Canadian history, but then also American as well,
Okay.
and it weaves memoir-ish with journalistic kind of broad
Mm.
storytelling. Um, and then Murray Sinclair is also, he was a Canadian justice. He was, I think, the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He just passed away about a year ago.
Oh.
But he has a book called Who We Are,
Mm.
and it's one of my favorites as well. So those are a few, I think.
Yeah, those are some good ones.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on and talking about it. Thank you for writing it. Did you say you're writing another one right now too? Because if so, I'm excited to see what's next.
I am.
Yeah.
I The actual active writing is paused right now.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
I have gotten a few words out here and there. I don't know if that makes sense because it'll be at 2 a.m. when I'm
Mm-hmm.
kind of nursing my baby back to bed.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it's part of my thesis that I just submitted
Oh.
a couple weeks ago now. And it primarily focuses on my relationship with my dad
Oh, wow.
and his family.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Fascinating. Well,
mhm.
I'm intrigued. I will be picking it up whenever you have time to finish it. But yeah, everybody go get your copy, read this, DM me. I'm sure they can message you about what they love about it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.